in Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew, live from Capitol Hill, alongside Tyler Kendall in our Washington bureau. And tonight we begin with breaking news. Voting is now underway in the House of Representatives on a 3-year extension of the COVID-era Obamacare subsidies. A number of Republicans are expected to break with party leadership on this as we bring you a live view of the House floor on Bloomberg TV. And we've got the big story covered for you here in the Capitol, all the way over to the White House and to our bureau here in Washington.
We'll also have the latest on the protests in Minneapolis amid the investigation into the killing of a U.S. citizen by an ICE agent.
We do begin here on Capitol Hill with the latest on the Obamacare developments, Tyler, and we bring in Bloomberg's Erik Wasson for more. Erik, the voting is now underway, and I believe we saw 9 Republicans cross over in the procedural vote. Is that the number we should have in mind today?
There were 9, and then there were 11 on a second vote.
Okay.
Lauren Boebert just announced that she had voted incorrectly, so it's 10. But I think there might be a larger number on the final content of the bill. So we're looking to see, if we can get a dozen or 2 dozen, and that will give some momentum in the Senate for these bipartisan talks. My colleague Caitlin Riley and I are tracking these bipartisan closed-door talks on a possible compromise. This is a 3-year extension. It could be a 2-year extension with some anti-fraud controls, some health savings accounts. We talked to Brian Fitzpatrick, one of the leading members who's negotiating this. He's very optimistic they can release a bill early next week, so that's where there could be a solution. It's still an uphill battle, but there is a possibility.
So what's the point? If this is not the bill that becomes law, is this about generating some momentum, getting this back on the board, or is there more to it?
That's right. It's pressuring the Senate, putting a vehicle. The House has to start these revenue-type bills, get it over in the Senate, say this is a live ball. Look, we got a lot of political pressure now, so we got some momentum. But, time is really running out. Members of the public who are Obamacare recipients, 20 million people have already been affected by this when it expired at the beginning of the year, and they would extend open enrollment possibly to March 1st. But already people are feeling this pain.
All right, this ought to be wrapped up pretty shortly here, Erik. I know you're watching it with us. Erik Wasson live on Capitol Hill. Let's check back in with Tyler Kendall in our Washington bureau. Tyler?
All right. Thanks so much, Joe. And we're going to take a look now at how the White House is watching all of these events that are unfolding on Capitol Hill tonight and bring in Bloomberg's Mario Parker for the latest. So, Mario, as Erik was just outlining, it is not clear if any of this legislation is going to get to President Trump's desk, and if it does, what it's going to look like. But how is health care becoming a potential political headwind for this White House?
No, absolutely. We want to get used to the term affordability for our viewers. You'll hear that throughout a lot of this year, and a lot of that is because Democrats feel like they won a political gambit late last year by putting health care front and center with the expiration of these ACA credits. And we see the White House on its back foot on this issue right now.
Is President Trump going to get more involved? Because perhaps surprisingly or not surprisingly, President Trump didn't really weigh into this battle during the government shutdown. He does talk a lot about this idea of giving more money to consumers instead of insurance companies. But is he going to have to get more involved in a tangible policy way?
He probably will, Tyler. That's a great point. I mean, for the better part of the last decade, the president has struggled with the ACA, Obamacare. He's by turns railed against it, said that he would have an alternative plan for it, and then also been burned by it, right? We remember the late John McCain changing his vote at the last second and really stubbing his finger, if you will, at the president. So it's a political hot button for the president. Again, it goes back to this affordability issue. The fact that we've seen ACA change so much politically over the last decade has also been disorienting for the president, right? At the start of his political career, it was Obamacare is bad. Now some of his own supporters depend on the very plan.
In the final minute I have you, another movement that we're watching on Capitol Hill is this War Powers resolution. We saw it advance in the Senate today. We're expecting a final vote next week. How is the White House reacting to all of this? Because this seems to be almost a parallel with Republicans, at least 5 today, going against this president.
Yes, absolutely. And we saw the president's Truth Social post nearly in real time where he railed against those 5 Republican senators who broke ranks with him, one of which is namely is Susan Collins, who faces a re-election bid in one of the key swing states the Democrats want to pick up.
All right, so many things for us to keep our eyes on. Bloomberg's Mario Parker, thank you so much as always. And let's check back in with Joe Matthew, who's on Capitol Hill.
All right, Tyler, as the voting continues here, joining us now with his insights, a man who just voted, came off the House floor to sit down with us, Democratic Congressman Greg Stanton of Arizona, who serves on both the House Foreign Affairs Committee and House Transportation. It's great to see you. Welcome back to Bloomberg TV and radio.
To be clear, I voted yes on today's bill.
Yes, I don't have to ask you that, and I was pretty sure that was the case. The question is, how many Republicans might cross the aisle with you, and what number do you need to reach some sort of critical mass that gets the attention of John Thune?
We've already got the attention of John Thune.
Yeah.
I thought what he knows his members are right now working with Democratic members of the Senate on a deal. They need to get a deal done, and it will send a strong message with the bipartisan support. Right before we started talking, we checked. I think it was up to 13 Republicans, but still many more to come.
Yeah.
So we're expecting 20 or more Republicans will join us on a bipartisan health care package that will reduce costs for the American people.
Well, that's fascinating. This is a clean extension for 3 years, I believe. The bill that you're talking about in the Senate comes with some strings attached. I think it's a 2-year extension, and there are some eligibility requirements, a cap on income. Is that something Democrats can warm up to if it means extending these subsidies?
Well, look, we're not going to negotiate on the air here,
course.
but we're reasonable people, and we're willing to actually engage in negotiations.
So that's a productive
which should have happened months and months ago.
Well,
we were very clear that during the time of the shutdown, that we need to both end the shutdown and reduce health care costs for the American people. The Republicans refused to have conversations with us. Now they're in the situation where the American people are receiving their premiums exactly what we said was going to happen. They're doubling, they're tripling. Millions of Americans will choose not to reaffirm their health care and go without health insurance because of it. It's an unacceptable situation, first and foremost, for people's health, for families, and secondarily, the Republicans know that it is politically unacceptable that their inaction, their unwillingness to partner with us is what's causing this massive increase in health care costs.
Does this debate over health care grease the skids or make it more difficult for government funding to be completed in time for the deadline at the end of this month?
I mean, look,
people forget, but this is what caused the longest shutdown in history.
Yes, but look, it is time that we get back to regular order, which means actual bipartisanship, both on the issue of health care and on the issue of passing appropriation bills, which means compromise. And this president needs to understand, in order to get things through the United States Congress, you need bipartisan participation. He needs to get in the game and come here, bring his team here, and start negotiation, not just with Republicans, and then, you know, when they vote against him on something, taking away water projects like they did with Congresswoman Boebert, totally unacceptable. If you want to get things done, you have to work in a bipartisan way. There is no other way to operate in this community.
You mentioned that water project. This is an interesting moment up here where you've got Republicans looking to buck presidential vetoes. You've got Republicans crossing the aisle on a war powers vote next door in the Senate. Now you've got at least 13 Republicans who walked across the aisle to vote for this discharge petition to extend Obamacare subsidies. Yeah. Has Donald Trump found the line on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, I think about time. Where have you been? It's okay to express your own actual opinion. You are elected by the people in your community. You're not elected by Donald Trump. And if you disagree with him, and I know many of them disagree with him on issue after issue, it's okay. You're in Congress. You're elected by the people in your community. You need to express that, and it's okay to vote against the President of the United States.
There was a time when he said he wanted to make a deal and suggested that he would make a deal on health care subsidies with Democrats. That evolved into give the money directly to the people and they can go work it out with the insurance companies. What happened in the middle of that? Do you hear any conversation from the White House that suggests the president still wants to make a deal?
Well, look, you may have these concepts of a plan that you're still working out. Right now, the issue, if you want to lower health care costs for American people right now, the deal on the table is providing tax credits so people can better afford the Affordable Care Act. That is the approach right now, not some conceptual idea, but if you want to get something done for the American people to lower costs right now, they need to take the deal, support that. This is going to pass today. It's amazing that the Democrats are in the minority, but our plan is the one that's on the House floor now, and it's going to pass, because that's what lower costs to the American people.
You and I are looking at the House floor right now, Congressman. There you have it. You've got the votes. So this is as good as passed. And I realize some people can still change their votes at this point, but the math is clearly there. I don't know how many more Republicans, if any, now that this has passed, sign on to it. But is this about frontliners? Is this about Republicans in blue states, or is this something bigger? What are you hearing behind the scenes when we don't have cameras and microphones around?
I know you're addressing sort of the political dilemma that they have. Obviously, the momentum is on the Democratic side to win the majority in this upcoming election. But I got an idea. Just do what's right for the American people. The American people are clamoring for lower costs. They know that these tariffs are increasing costs on virtually everything that they buy. And they know that the Affordable Care Act tax credits help to make health care affordable for the American people. I know a lot of the Republicans over many years have attacked Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. Okay. Long term, you want to have discussions about some of the things you talked about, some of the ideas that they have. We'll enter the conversations. But right now, the policy on the table is what the Democrats are proposing, a 3-year extension.
This is all today happening against the backdrop of another terrible tragedy that has created a new conversation about political violence in this country. When you look at what happened in Minneapolis and the shooting death of this woman by an ICE agent, the investigation has barely begun, Congressman. And everyone seems to think they know, based on their political affiliation, what happened. The doom scroll this morning was like a Rorschach test. You could tell whether this was a Trump supporter or a Democrat weighing in on the outcome here. This is 15 years to the day that Gabby Giffords was shot in your state of Arizona. And I know that hits very closely to home for you. 15 years later, this has become a more difficult, not an easier conversation in this country. How do we get around it when it's that predictable? You go on social media and people think they already know what happened.
Well, in the case of ICE, look, the President of the United States campaigned on getting immigrants that are here that have violated our laws and are violent to be deported. He had bipartisan support on that. Democrats and Republicans agree that if you are in this country in an undocumented way and you've committed violent crimes, you have to go. But what he's doing is very different. It is mass deportation, and they're hiring thousands and thousands of new ICE officers so quickly that they're not getting the proper training. I was a mayor of a big city. The police department in Phoenix received incredible amount of training about how to deal with very difficult situations, potentially dangerous situations, interacting with the public in high-pressure situations. They are hiring these ICE officers so quickly. I am confident that they're not getting the type of training to help them actually deal with de-escalation, which this situation, from what I saw, should have been handled in a de-escalatory way. Instead, it ended up with a young woman, a 37-year-old mother, dying. We need to really look at these hiring practices and the lack of training. We can make the situation much safer, and we need to again focus in on violent criminals, not on mass deportation. The American people are saying that's not what we want.
Well, I hope we can de-escalate the political fallout as well, Congressman.
That's probably a good point, too.
Good to spend some time with you. Democratic Congressman Greg Stanton of Arizona, fresh off the floor of the House. He's a yes, Tyler. Let's get back to you in the Washington Bureau.
Great conversation, Joe. And I mean, the congressman telling Joe right there that Democrats feel that they have the attention of Senate Majority Leader John Thune, because our conversation is about to turn to that, as it appears that this vote in the House has the votes needed to pass that threshold. Coming up, we're going to bring you what's next and all the unfolding breaking news on Capitol Hill, continuing our conversation and special coverage with Democratic Congresswoman Madeleine Dean of Pennsylvania and Republican Congressman LaLota of New York. That's up ahead. Keep with us. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thanks for joining us. I'm Joe Matthew, live on Capitol Hill with Tyler Kendall in our Washington Bureau. And breaking news here from the Capitol, where the U.S. House of Representatives has just passed the discharge petition to extend or revive Obamacare subsidies. These are the extended COVID-era subsidies in a clean 3-year extension. The final count, 17 Republicans crossing the aisle in favor. Joining us now live on Capitol Hill, one of the Republican yes votes, Congressman LaLota of New York, who serves on both the House Appropriations Committee and the House Small Business Committee. From The View from Long Island, it's great to see you on Bloomberg TV and radio. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for the invitation.
I know you ran up from the House floor, and we appreciate that a lot. You're a yes vote, which is not a surprise, because you're one of the Republicans who helped to unlock this discharge petition. And you've already been talking with some of your colleagues in the upper chamber. Now that this has happened, where does it go?
Yeah, so we wanted to give some wind in the sails of our colleagues in the Senate who are eager to do something on this issue. The Republicans who voted in favor of this just a few moments ago here in Washington know a few things. We know that there are cracks in the foundation of the Affordable Care Act. We know that 1 in 3 claims are denied. We know that premiums have risen 60% more than inflation since its inception. And we know that the insurance companies are making $1 gazillion. Nevertheless, a lot of our constituents rely on these subsidies. And doing nothing, we knew, was not an option. So we wanted to, and we explored several different options before Christmas. Unfortunately, a number of them were blocked by our Rules Committee. And this was the only option available to us, was to pass this 3-year extension, which we understand is dead in arrival in the Senate. But we expect the Senate to instead use this as an impetus to have probably a 2-year extension with some income caps and some fraud protections and some other reforms that Obamacare desperately needs.
Okay, so this is interesting because this is, I guess, a little bit of how the sausage is made, right? This bill is not likely to become law, but there is a companion bill, if we can call it that, in the Senate that looks a bit different, a 2-year extension with some eligibility requirements, minimum income requirements, maximum cutoff. Is that something that Democrats will be able to talk to Republicans about and codify into a final bill?
I think so. I think especially in the Problem Solvers Caucus, there's a large understanding that there needs to be some compromise. Democrats are quite keen on just extending the credits, and Republicans are quite keen on having some reforms, revisions, especially related to fraud. The Senate bill that's coming to fruition soon will probably have a hybrid mix of both, which will enable it likely and hopefully to get the 60 votes in the Senate, and it comes back to the House and will likely get the 218. That's the best path for both the short and long term of the Affordable Care Act.
So as a Republican here, and you hear what the president's rhetoric is, forget Obamacare, scrap it and give the money directly to people. There's been a real allergy to extending some of these subsidies for many, if not most, members of your Republican House conference. So do you feel like you're on an island or a trailblazer on this issue?
No, I heard differently from the president when he was with the House Republican Conference on Monday. What I heard from him, I heard him say, be practical, be reasonable, offer solutions, give the money directly to the people, but there is fraud, waste, and abuse in the system, and tackle that. That's what I heard. Everybody hears their own different thing, but that's what I heard.
But give it directly to people does not extend the subsidies, right?
It's tough to do mechanically, I'm told. I'm in favor of a tax provision, an above-the-line tax provision that would either provide for either a deduction or a credit directly to people. Apparently that might not be able to be done here within short order, such that when people file their taxes here in a few weeks or months, they can get it. But maybe that's a longer-term solution to make health care a little more affordable. But what the Senate's cooking up right now is a good bipartisan solution that hopefully passes the Senate, comes back to the House and passes, and one the president will be proud to sign.
You know what else we heard him say was have some flexibility on the Hyde Amendment. That raised some eyebrows. I'm wondering what you're hearing off the air from your Republican colleagues on that and how much of a sticking point that's going to be.
I think the best path to 60 votes in the Senate and 218 in the House is just have the status quo on Hyde. Hyde has applied to these tax credits in one way for the last 3 years. Let's have it apply the same way. No more, no less. So no one group can claim some sort of victory or feign defeat. Have the status quo on Hyde. I think that's the best way to move forward on these credits.
All right, so here we are, beginning of January, and there's a lot of stuff that needs to happen by the end of the month, including we've got a funding deadline to manage. How quickly can this process work with Obamacare subsidies to get through the Senate? We already went over the cliff, so it's just a matter of time at this point. How long might people on Long Island have to wait?
Yeah, deadlines seem to be a good thing, I think, in this town. I'm here 3 years. At first, I used to get a little anxious over these deadlines, but these deadlines catalyze meetings, they catalyze actions, they ensure that we make progress on things. So on the appropriations bills, we have 9 appropriations bills we still need to get signed into law. We hope to do so before the end of the year. The Appropriations Committee, with which I'm very familiar, is on track to do that. Of course, we passed our 12 bills out of committee before the fiscal year ended in September, so we can stay on that path, and I'm hopeful that we do.
Okay, so you don't see a shutdown in the cards, or that depending on the outcome of health care, apparently, or these are two isolated events. How long will it take to address Obamacare subsidies? And if you extend the open enrollment to the middle of March, is that enough time?
I think mechanically that is enough time for the 50,000 or so of my constituents who rely on the Affordable Care Act, the 24 million Americans who rely on the Affordable Care Act. I think that is enough time for the government, Congress, to provide some assistance, some much-needed assistance to get the relief to Americans they need. It's all about affordability these days.
Sure.
The Republicans passed a tremendous tax package which provides great tax relief to middle-class families. No tax on tips, Social Security, overtime. Where I'm from, the state and local tax deduction matters a heck of a lot to us. We did a lot for middle-class families in that tax package. Doing something on health care will be demonstrative, too.
I remember talking to you the morning after the election, the morning after Zohran Mamdani was elected mayor of New York. Now that he is in, how's he doing?
My constituents are anxious about what this administration, the Mamdani administration, will mean for them. Most recently, we heard about seizing private property, or at least putting constraints on it, where private property owners can't sell their properties to each other. They first have to go through this public-private partnership entity before they sell their properties. That's scary to us. This concept of collectivism is just a code word for socialism or Marxism, which hasn't worked anywhere. The Soviet Union, Cuba, Venezuela, it hasn't worked anywhere in the world. It won't work in New York. My constituents in suburban New York are anxious as to what these policies will mean for the rest of the state. Of course, New York City is a great tax-generating entity for the rest of the state. A lot of our state budget is built upon the companies that do business in New York State. If they continue to flee to greener pastures, I fear larger consequences for the rest of the state.
So he hasn't won you over yet. Are you in touch with him? Has he actually reached out to the delegation?
No,
Okay.
I don't expect that anytime soon.
No?
I'm in
All right.
touch with a few people from his administration and some public safety
He's
issues.
friends with Donald Trump now. You never know.
Donald Trump will talk to anybody. He's made a name for himself in many ways, including having an open door to many people. And
How about that?
And I wish the both of them well.
Well, we always have an open door to you, and I appreciate it, Congressman. Thanks for coming to see us on Bloomberg. Republican Congressman Nick LaLota of New York, we thank you. We check back with Tyler now. Let's bring it back to our Washington bureau. Tyler?
Thanks, Joe. Great conversation there. The congressman saying that it is all about affordability. Now, we do want to take a pause in the breaking news on Capitol Hill for a moment and turn towards the markets, because we're keeping an eye on General Motors, which became the latest automaker to announce a financial hit from its investments in electric vehicles. For the details, let's turn now to Power Moves with Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, who joins us live from World Headquarters in New York. So, Romaine, what are we hearing from GM amid a policy backdrop here in Washington that's rolled back federal support when it comes to EVs?
Yeah, GM down in the after-hours trade, and this is largely on the back of about $7.6 billion in charges that it plans to take for the most recent quarter. Roughly about $6 billion of those charges are directly related to a scale back in its electric vehicle strategy. Now, remember, it was just a couple of weeks ago where we heard from Ford Motor Company. They actually said they were going to be taking a charge of close to $19 billion as they scale back their electric vehicle strategy here. And this has been the talk of the town. We're starting to get data for 2025 about how many EV cars were sold. And, well, let's just say growth was somewhat tepid here, not necessarily meeting some of the high expectations folks had going into 2025 or into 2026. And in fact, Tyler, when you look at the broader market today, we came into today with a real focus, people looking at various industries and sectors, people looking at economic conditions ahead of that big jobs report tomorrow, and people looking at policies coming out of Washington. And you saw this bifurcation in the market. The S&P was flat, the NASDAQ was down, the Russell outperformed. Those are the small cap stocks, as people are showing maybe some confidence that there will be more economic stability out there. And more importantly, as I'm sure you're going to cover, maybe potentially a Supreme Court decision on tariffs that could be favorable to a lot of those names. You also saw defense stocks also continue to rally today. We saw that in the after hours trade yesterday. In the cash session today, they continued that move higher here. This largely on the back of the proposal by President Trump to increase the nation's defense budget, potentially by as much as 50% if he were to get his way. But I do want to bring your attention real quickly, Tyler, to another big story that broke just over the last hour, and this involves mortgage bonds. President Trump apparently directing the FHFA to buy up $200 billion in mortgage bonds. Bill Pulte confirming that that request is on the table, confirming that with Bloomberg News, and you're seeing the mortgage companies rally. You take a couple of big names there on your screen, including Rocket, including Open, all moving higher here on the day. The home builders themselves, too, Tyler, including Lennar, D.R. Horton, and Toll Brothers, also moving higher here in the after-hours trade. All
right, keeping an eye on all of it for us, Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick. Thank you, as always. And Bloomberg News is reporting China plans to approve some imports of Nvidia's H200 chips as soon as this quarter for select commercial use. That's according to people familiar with the matter. The move will give the chip maker renewed access to a critical market, but the H200 will be barred from the military, sensitive government agencies, critical infrastructure, and state-owned enterprises over security concerns. Joining me now with their expert analysis is Jennifer Welch, Chief Geoeconomics Analyst with Bloomberg Economics, and Bloomberg's Michael Shepard, a senior editor here in our bureau. Mike, let's start with you because this White House signaled months ago, right, that Nvidia could export select chips like this to China. So put into context for us, how big of a win is this for the company?
Well, this is a major win on a couple of different fronts. First, it managed to pivot the U.S. government, which is not an easy thing to do, away from a long-standing approach when it comes to China in particular. And the idea that keeping any advanced American technology out of China was really an article of faith for policymakers from both parties. But the administration has embraced the point of view from Silicon Valley, principally, that, look, if you want to beat China in other global markets, you have to be able to compete with them in their own. And the idea of sending the H200, which is a less advanced chip than its latest Blackwell line, you are setting up competition in China for some of Nvidia's global rivals, including Huawei and others that have tried to break into the AI space and have done so with some success domestically because Nvidia has effectively been out of that market since 2022 when the Biden administration began imposing those limits on being able to sell to China. Now, as far as what this means for the company itself, this is a huge opportunity. Jensen Huang has identified China as a potential $50 billion opportunity over the coming years for its AI chips alone. And it has really been the focus of Jensen's efforts to win favor with Donald Trump and administration officials on that front.
Right, and part of the administration's argument before they got this green light was surrounding national security. And Jennifer, I want to get your reaction to this, too, but tie it into perhaps a bigger picture that could happen this week. As Romaine mentioned, we are waiting for the Supreme Court to potentially strike down President Trump's tariffs related to IEEPA. But he has put so many other tariffs in place over national securities, the same exact evidence that they've pointed to when they're making decisions about these critical sectors and technologies like chips and critical minerals. Are we going to see a renewed emphasis by the administration on tariffs related to national security, depending on how the Supreme Court rules?
So only the court knows how they're going to rule tomorrow, but we're expecting them to throw out the use of IEEPA, which is at the moment the backstop for about 3/4 of Trump's tariffs, $150 billion in tariff revenue, too, which, by the way, they'll have to figure out how to refund. But we expect the administration to very quickly move towards finding new legal backstops for that, including Section 122 and Section 301 investigations that already exist, namely for China, while building up new Section 301 investigations, which are centered on national security concerns for other economies. There's a lot of questions about how long that might take and the potential for that to cause tensions with trade partners that feel they've already been through this with the United States. They've already negotiated deals, and now all of that is being reopened by these new investigations that may unlock additional points of friction.
Well, Mike, how has this administration been balancing these trade frictions that we're outlining? But let's zero in on China, because when it comes to tech, China really is at the forefront of this competition.
And it was at the center, Tyler, as you remember, of the negotiations that really took months and culminated in that meeting between President Donald Trump and his counterpart Xi Jinping. And the question of U.S. export controls that we were discussing as applied to Nvidia and its competitor here in the U.S., Advanced Micro Devices, against what China has discovered as its own tool of economic leverage, and that is export controls that it has imposed and used when it comes to rare earths magnets, which are important to a wide range of industries here in this country, not just tech, but to defense, to the auto industry, everywhere. And China's ability to control that really forced both sides to the table. It prompted an outcry, not just in the U.S., but among a number of other large economies who are prepared to join the U.S. in trying to take some sort of action against China. And it really helped bring the two sides together in a way, each trying to exert some sort of leverage and find a way back down. And of course, we see that there is this agreement for China to now open the floodgate, if you will, on rare earths elements and other critical minerals, perhaps in exchange for a little bit more access to some of the advanced technology that we've been talking about. But this is a balancing act for both sides, because just as there is domestic pressure here in the U.S. for no China business, we've heard the conversation about decoupling and really trying to close off and wall off any advanced U.S. technology from going to China. Likewise, in China, there is a go-it-alone cadre inside the Chinese Communist Party, and there is a push for increased self-reliance, especially in the area of artificial intelligence and advanced semiconductors. So this is something we're going to want to watch as it plays out, and especially as tensions remain between the two sides over Taiwan and even over Venezuela, where, China is the top buyer of Venezuelan oil. How will the U.S. action affect that? And how will China take what the U.S. is trying to do in this hemisphere and apply it to its own?
All right. Fascinating insights from both of you. Bloomberg's Michael Shepard and Bloomberg Economics' Jennifer Welch. Thank you both. Let's go back to the breaking news on Capitol Hill and check in with Joe Matthew, who's standing by with a special guest.
Yeah, Tyler, they passed the bill. Let's get to the breaking news right off the top. And it took a number of Republicans to make it happen, and then some. 17 Republicans crossed the aisle to vote for this discharge petition to extend or revive Obamacare subsidies that expired at the end of last year. And joining us now with more on this is Democratic Congresswoman Madeleine Dean of Pennsylvania, who serves on both the House Appropriations Committee and the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Just voted yes on this herself. It's great to see you in person. Thanks for being with us on Bloomberg.
Thank you. Glad to be with you.
17 of your colleagues from across the aisle. Is that enough to create momentum in the upper chamber, keep the ball rolling here?
What I think this is a great day. It's a great day for the American public, because obviously Democrats pushed this. We pushed it last year through the shutdown to say you have to do better. You have to protect people and their access to health care, the affordability of health care. And you saw now 17 Republicans have come alongside us. I think they saw the writing on the wall of their constituents. They saw the light. I'll give them credit. They voted the right way to get people back to coverage that is affordable. Is it enough? I don't know. We're going to see in the Senate what they do. But I think that shows powerful momentum and a message as much from the Democrats, but much more from the American people.
Yeah. Do you worry about some of the limitations or restrictions that are on the Senate bill that's being crafted? It's 2, not 3 years, but it comes with eligibility requirements, an income cap, and looks a little bit different than the bill you voted for today. Is that something that you could handle if it meant bringing these subsidies back?
I'd have to see what it is.
Okay.
Obviously, I don't mind if it... I don't want to negotiate against what we've already done, which is a 3-year, and that's what it should be. I was persuaded, and a lot of folks are persuaded, that any kind of changes or limitations or caps or penalties or whatever would not be productive. If you want to come up with an even better version of the Affordable Care Act, let's get these subsidies reinstated and use the time in a bipartisan way to actually do that. What was strange and an absolute gap and baffling to me is the Republicans have had 12, 13, 14 years to come up with an alternate plan. Never did. We have concepts of a plan. They never came up with another plan. And I think about my constituents. They are very happy that they know that, for example, pre-existing conditions are no longer a barrier to coverage. If we go back, that's what happened. Pre-existing conditions. In many ways, women, just by being women, were considered a pre-existing condition. That our kids could stay on our coverage until they're 26. This is stuff America doesn't want to turn back. And what we ought to be doing is getting more people access to affordable health care.
Well, I know you say Republicans don't have a plan. The president says, here's the plan, send the money directly to people. And then they can go to presumably the insurance companies, which I guess get the money in the end. Congresswoman, what would happen if we did that? If we each called the insurance company to ask them for a rate or to negotiate coverage, what would we end up with?
Chaos. And the individual person would be harmed. And we know that. That sounds like a plan. It isn't a plan. We'll give you a check. Try to just discourage people. That's not a plan. What people need is predictable, affordable, accessible health care. And whether the president cares about that or not, the American people care about it, and that's what today's vote proved.
So as a Democrat, what are you thinking today when you look around the Hill? What just happened in your chamber? 17 Republicans coming over to vote for this. What happened next door in the Senate with a number of Republicans voting for a War Powers Act to check the president in Venezuela. There were some override votes being held today to override presidential vetoes. Has the president found the line here on Capitol Hill?
Well, I'm not somebody who pays a lot of attention to the polls, but the polls are undeniable. The president is underwater in his approval ratings, extraordinarily underwater on the economy, which is something new. That did not happen to him in his first term. In this term, he is well underwater on the economy. In terms of foreign affairs, he's showing that he's unhinged, he's unwell, he's erratic, that he was willing to make this attack on Venezuela without coming to Congress. I thought it was gravely irresponsible. More important than that, without a plan for the day after. We had a confidential briefing, as you know, and it was not persuasive as to the plan for the day after. What was persuasive was the American military and intelligence communities performed amazingly well, but the administration doesn't have a clue what they're doing.
Will the House take up War Powers, Jim McGovern's bill? Is this something that you'll meet the Senate on?
Yes, I'm hoping to. I know Jim's put his in or is going to put his in. So this is an important set of checks on the president. As he irresponsibly talks about Greenland, Canada, Cuba, Mexico, Colombia. Greenland will not be next. They will not be able to do that. And all of this goes to the point that the president has not focused on the American people, the cost of living here, the cost of groceries here, the cost of what we just went through with the holidays, whether you're buying Hanukkah gifts or Christmas gifts or birthday gifts. The president has not focused and, in fact, has harmed our economy, directly, single-handedly harmed our economy with the irresponsible and erratic tariffs.
It'd be interesting to see what the Supreme Court says about that, potentially as early as tomorrow.
Tomorrow morning.
Thank you so much for spending some time with us today on Capitol Hill. That's Democratic Congresswoman Madeleine Dean of Pennsylvania. We thank you for the insights. Another story that we've been tracking is the scene today playing out in Minneapolis after protesters gathered for a vigil for the 37-year-old citizen Renee Nicole Good, who was shot, killed by an ICE officer during a confrontation, with both the president now and Vice President J.D. Vance accusing the woman of running over the ICE officer. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt doubling down on the administration's position during a news conference earlier today. Let's listen.
The deadly incident that took place in Minnesota yesterday occurred as a result of a larger, sinister, left-wing movement that has spread across our country, where our brave men and women of federal law enforcement are under organized attack.
Joining us now for more, Bloomberg's Myles Miller, who's been all over this story. And Myles, as you report on national security for us here at Bloomberg, I'm wondering your thoughts or whatever you can report on the investigation. Here in Washington, everyone seems to have decided what happened already.
Yeah, you know, and it was interesting. I asked the secretary, she was in New York today, whether she agreed with the initial assessment by Tom Homan, who said, you know, let the investigation play out. And then he eventually came to that this was justified. Yeah, as you mentioned, there is an FBI investigation into what happened here, but the minds have been made up in the Trump administration. They believe this officer was justified. The secretary said that the woman who was shot and killed had been stalking and harassing these officers all day, blocking them with their vehicle. But, you know, in covering federal law enforcement for quite some time, they judge all of these incidents by what's called the reasonable officer standard.
So
would a reasonable officer be able to know that they were going to be in fear for their lives? And that's exactly what they'll be judging this by.
All right, Bloomberg's Myles Miller, thank you so much for all of your reporting. And coming up, we'll continue our coverage of the Affordable Care Act premium subsidies vote when we assemble our political panel. Plus, we're going to speak to one of the Republican lawmakers who crossed the aisle and voted in favor of the extension. That's Congressman Ryan Mackenzie of Pennsylvania. Keep with us. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. I'm Joe Matthew, live on Capitol Hill alongside Tyler Kendall in our Washington bureau. With breaking news this evening, the bill passed along with 17 Republicans voting yes and all Democrats not a huge shock on that side of the aisle, to revive Obamacare subsidies that expired at the end of last year. And I'm here with one of the Republicans who helped to make this happen to begin with, forcing this vote to the floor, Republican Congressman Ryan Mackenzie of Pennsylvania, who serves on both the House Foreign Affairs Committee and House Homeland Security. Congressman, it's great to see you. Thanks for being with us on Bloomberg TV and radio. 17 Republicans today. It was a much smaller number, though, when you signed on to the discharge petition. And I wonder if you can explain the psychology here and what led you to that point, because you were one of the first Republicans to stick your head up to vote yes.
Absolutely. So since running for office in 2024 on the campaign trail, the biggest issue that we heard about was affordability and cost of living issues. And so that has not changed. After 4 years of Bidenflation, people were suffering. And I say it's the 2 F's and 2 H's. Food and fuel, housing and health care. Those are what make up the bulk of people's household incomes, and they've been struggling to make ends meet. And so in this category of health care, the extension of the tax credits is something that could provide some affordability, some relief for millions of Americans. And so when the issue came up, it was something that I was supportive of right from the get-go.
Was your phone ringing off the hook? What was constituent services going through leading up to the shutdown and through that period of time that made you feel this way?
Yeah, look, I think it's very important in a district like ours to be responsive to constituents.
Yeah.
So we heard from some people that utilize these. I have often given the example of a restaurateur, a small business owner in our district. He said that his premium was going to go from $391 a month up to over $900 a month.
Wow.
And he said it's simply not sustainable for him and his family. And so what he was choosing to do at that time was to de-enroll in his health insurance, hoping that Congress would come back and take some kind of action, provide some kind of relief or a new way for him to re-enroll in a new program.
Yeah.
And then he would actually be able to get health care. And so ultimately, though, that leaves him in a position where he is going to have no health insurance for his family, putting them in a very vulnerable and precarious situation,
That's
not
dangerous.
where we want people to be.
Well, there are a lot of dangerous stories like these, and I wonder if you have a sense or if we can even quantify the damage done in terms of people who said, you know what, forget it. At the end of last year, I'm just not going to enroll, because there'll have to be a big communications or messaging campaign to get them back on board if this happens, right?
Yeah, I think it's hard to judge because there are a lot of different moving pieces in a market like this and different considerations that people have. So it could be that they were on a program like this with the extended tax credits, but now they've moved into an employer-sponsored health plan. At the same time, we saw healthy and robust enrollments in Pennsylvania. So what we would like to do, though, if there is going to be a bipartisan solution that comes out of the Senate, we want to make sure that there is an extension of the enrollment period so that anybody who maybe like this individual who did de-enroll, if they want to get back into a plan that has an extension.
What's a reasonable window?
Credits.
Middle of March?
Yeah, I think middle of March is what people have talked about, and I think that is a reasonable plan.
So when you look at the bill that's making its way through the Senate, 2-year extension, eligibility requirements, I think 700% of the poverty level is the cutoff. Is that reasonable as well?
It is. And so what we have talked about in the House is we've had 2 bipartisan proposals that I've been a part of that we have put forward months ago, saying that these are the general parameters. We want to get rid of those $0 premium plans because of the potential for fraud. We want some kind of income caps. We would like to see also some potential for reforms, like cracking down on PBMs, so you could bring down the cost of health term.
That's a bipartisan
in the long term
issue.
It is bipartisan. All of these things had bipartisan support. We rolled out those 2 packages, but unfortunately, what we saw in the House was our team didn't have the requisite members willing to support it to get it actually a vote on the floor. And at the same time, you saw the Democrats and Hakeem Jeffries actually block their members from signing on to those bipartisan discharge petitions. If they would have done that, we could have been much further along in this discussion. We could have avoided the lapse at the end of December. We could have had one of those bipartisan solutions get over to the Senate. What you're seeing now is, unfortunately, the lapse has occurred. Our efforts in the House are keeping this conversation alive, and what is going on in the Senate is they are looking at plans very similar to what we had already proposed here in the House, and so hopefully we'll get to one of those resolutions.
What's the conversation when you're in the cloakroom and I'm not around with a microphone and a camera here? Is it, hey, you're making this hard on me, what are you doing to our party? Or is it, thanks for giving me cover here and voting for this?
I think there are certainly some people that are just totally opposed and they're not going to change. And that's their own right, and they represent their districts. At the same time, what I've been pleasantly surprised with is some people in our party that were initially opposed. They've been willing to have reasonable conversations with me. I explain what's going on in my district at home, why this is so important to us, and give the example like I did about the restaurateur. And it's not just him, but it's other small business owners, realtors, other individuals that used to be in what we considered association health plans, and they were able to get their health care through an association, whether it's a Chamber of Commerce, a Realtors Association, or otherwise. They've now been pushed to that Obamacare market. They've seen these increased premiums over the years, and so they're looking for relief. And so when I give that explanation to my fellow colleagues, some of them will come around and actually say, hey, I appreciate you sharing that with me. Don't disagree with you. And they say we're open to seeing what comes out of the Senate.
And that's how you get to 17 Republicans today. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
The number has been increasing, and so we're going to continue to work in a bipartisan way, and hopefully we'll get more support. And if something does come back from the Senate, I think that number of 17 is actually going to grow much further.
Really interesting. Been looking forward to this conversation. There may not be a state more important than Pennsylvania on the electoral map, and that's why Ryan Mackenzie, the Republican from Pennsylvania, is so important in this conversation. We're glad you could be with us on Bloomberg.
Well, thank
you so much. Let's check back in with Tyler in our Washington bureau. Tyler?
Thanks so much, Joe. And we're going to extend this exact conversation right now with their reaction to everything unfolding on the Hill. And that's our political panel tonight. Roger Fisk, Democratic strategist and former aide to President Obama, alongside Republican strategist Sarah Chamberlain, president and CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership. Sarah, let's start with you because we like to say that your crystal ball is normally right. So if we're taking what's happening in the House, what are the palatable changes that the Senate is going to make that then kicks it back to the House? And will this ultimately pass the House and make it to the president's desk?
Well, there's very little I can add that Ryan, who's a member of Republican Main Street Partnership, just spoke about. But we're hoping for some help on finding fraud, doing away with fraud. I mean, that's a huge issue in ACA or Obamacare. So we're hoping the Senate will make some tweaks there. I think if they do, you will see more than 17 members, all 17 members who did it were Republican Main Street Partnership members. I think there's probably another 20 or so that are out there looking for a few changes on the Senate side to bring it back. But that's a big one. We have a lot of fraud in ACA, and it has to be tackled.
So, Roger, today Democrats are billing this as a win. We heard from Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries. They say health care is not going to play into a potential government shutdown. I'm wondering, though, is this really a win? Because ultimately the bill as it stands in the House isn't going to become law. And we are talking about an extension. We're not talking about new policy. And we repeatedly hear from voters that they want more of a focus on affordability and bringing down costs across the board.
Sure. Thank you for having me. Wonderful to be here with Sarah. I don't know if it's a win in and of itself, but it's part of a win, and it's progress. The most fascinating thing for me is not only the inherent tensions between the House and the Senate, but the three-year model of the House punts this entire dynamic after the next presidential campaign. Whereas if the Senate gets their way and it's 2 years, that puts it right in the spring of 2028. So then that will change the whole tone and flavor of how all the candidates have to orient themselves around this issue. I think what we're going to see in the Senate is probably some kind of sliding scale, so 700% of the poverty level in the first year, 500% in the second year, some kind of out-of-pocket copay or something like that where there's a little bit more of a burden or an expectation on behalf of the individual. And then the real fun starts in conference when you take a 2-year model from the Senate and the 3-year model from the House. And then underlying all of that is some of the cultural issues, some of the restrictions on abortion services and things like that. So this is progress, but there's much, much more work ahead.
So if it comes back and the abortion, the Hyde Amendment is stricter, you will lose votes on the Republican side in the House. They do not want to see that. They do not want to revisit the whole abortion issue here.
I agree.
I wanted to ask you about that, Sarah, because that's a pretty big deal. And I asked a couple of members about that this evening. The impact of the Hyde Amendment. This is pretty difficult stuff, and it's very personal for a lot of lawmakers. To what extent, then, and which Republicans are we talking about when you mention that? Could that limit Republicans' ability to cross the aisle and vote for this with a straight face?
It absolutely could. If they make the Hyde Amendment stricter, you will lose some of the Republican Main Street Partnership members, maybe not all 17 of them that voted for today, but you certainly won't be adding any more to it. There's a lot of swing districts. All of these members today are pretty much still in swing districts. They do not want this issue brought up again. I mean, it hurt us last time it was brought up. We feel we lost some seats around it. We want the abortion issue done. We don't want it brought up. I know some of the conservatives really do want to make the Hyde Amendment even stricter. So this would be a little internal fight within the Republican Party.
That's an important part of this whole debate. Roger, we've been talking about Obamacare since you worked for Barack Obama 15 years ago, and there have been a lot of swings at the ball here by the Republican Party. Now that you're seeing the makeup, potentially, and you just walked us through it, of what could be a compromise bill, when you consider the eligibility requirements, the income limitations, what would the namesake, what would Barack Obama make of that?
That's a fascinating question. I think that he would be thrilled that the legislation still exists. But I also think, to Sarah's point, that it's something that every public policy requires scrutiny. And every public policy requires reform as it moves forward. There's no such thing, and there never has been, of a piece of policy or legislation that's impervious to change, and that can be technological change or any number of other things. So what I think on the Democratic side they need to do is take back the mantle of reform and double down on the idea that they're the responsible stewards of the taxpayer dollar. And I know that that is kind of a point of contention back and forth, because at any given point in an electoral cycle, one party can be looked upon as more responsible than the other. But the Democrats have a history of reform, and they should actually invite scrutiny on the policies that they endorse, because ultimately that's healthy, and that proves that they're responsible stewards to the American taxpayer.
Sarah, just 30 seconds. Are Republicans going to take the mantle of reform here?
We're trying to. I mean, we really need to reform ACA, Obamacare, whatever you want to call it. But there's a lot of issues within it. And I don't think the Democrats would disagree with me on that.
All right. A great conversation tonight. Roger Fisk and Sarah Chamberlain, our political panel. Thank you both, as always. To learn more about all of these stories and more, make sure to check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online.
Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power, live from Capitol Hill. I'm Joe Matthew. Of course, that's Tyler Kendall in our bureau, and we'll meet you back here for the Friday edition, only on Bloomberg TV and radio.